Alrighty, I'm back. So let's continue from where we left off. We are done with writing the instruction, and now we will go ahead and start with registering the user. Now, if you remember the design that we have and the discussion that we had during discussing the design, we said that when user register it, we do two things. One is checking if the user already exists and then add them as the user database. The second thing is registering them for the test. So we're going to have to do those two things in this register module. Now we know that we're going to receive a form, which is nothing but again the session model, the model, and name it model again. Now, just like the old thing, but because I wanted to make sure that we don't lose any session variable, I'll just simply assign whatever that we receive as session of session model equals model. This has nothing to do with any logic, but it's just being used for this page to make sure that we don't lose any session information in between. Model is not equals null, right? Now the second thing that we need to do is we can enforce a certain level of validation in the model by putting in test. We can say required field or anything, as I already explained in the beginning, but we're not going to do that in this aspect. We're just going to write in a very simple logic of validation. So let's say if model equals null, let's simply return redirect to action. We'll just simply take them to the login page again. Simple. All right. Now, if it is not null, then I think we're safe, but still we need to verify if the name and the test ID are all valid or if they are good. So let's say if string.isNull or empty or username or model.test ID, for whatever reason it is less than 1, that means it's a clear indication that they are invalid. So we'll pass the data to the server. I will show you the reason for putting all of this. Message equals invalid registration details, please try again, and then we'll redirect them to action, again index. Now there's one thing that I wanted us to all know. Why am I doing this? If you look at the page that we are, that is the entry page, the user does not get any message from the server. So as I already said, the entry point for this page is when the user comes in for the first time, or when there is, for whatever reason, there is some unexpected error and the user is redirected back to this page. So in those scenarios, there is a requirement that some form of a message indicating what is happening has to be passed to the user, right? So we're going to have to go back and modify a little bit on this page, because now that we see that if for whatever reason we get an error, we are just pushing the user back to it. So instead of putting these two, let's also put this one inside of this. Sounds fair? All right, now with all the validations done, now we are going to pass, and you know temp data, right? Temp data is slightly different from viewback, because in viewback it only persists for one request, between one request. But if you put a temp data, and because we're redirecting over to another page, so that involves multiple requests, so it carries over to the subsequent request, and we're going to expect temp data.message in the page instead of a viewback. So going back to index, we'll do a small validation on the top here before we begin the form. Somewhere here, let's say if temp data.message is not equal to null, right? That means if we ever get any message from the server, that means this is not the first time we're getting some error from somewhere, we'll display it here. Div class row, and then let's also specify it call and the, let's say 10 or 7 or 8, anything. Let's put paragraph, and we will say HTML.row. Why am I using this? Because there is a possibility that the message that I'm getting from the server here may be in the form of an HTML, so I want to render it properly. So I just said html.row, and then I'm going to put temp data.message. Okay, and just in case I wanted to put any colors, I can put in, but it really doesn't require right now. So this will ensure that the first time I log into the page in the index, because temp data.message is null, it will not show an error message. But if it comes from anywhere else where there's an error and you are redirected back to the page, this message will show above the login screen. Alright, so now we're good. We will continue. Assuming that everything else is fine, now is the time to go the registration process. First, let's initiate our database context. So it's equal to new Sinlung developers entities. Alright, okay, and then as we know, the first thing is to register the user, for test. All right, to the system maybe. Okay, so I think we understood what we're trying to do. So first, we have to validate if the user that we have submitted already exists or not. So it's going to be a simple validation that we do. You can do a more complex validation if you wanted to, but here is how we do. Context.students.where as, so it's name is never going to be null, so equals the model.name, and I just wanted to make sure that we are always using a case insensitive comparison because spellings can be. All right, so we got one right. Now we have to check, because the email, we're not putting the emails and the phone numbers anything mandatory, so we will check string.is null or empty model.email, and string.is null or empty from the existing database. So what we're doing here is we're just simply checking if the existing data that is there in the database for email is null, as well as if the user has submitted null. That means we're taking it as equal. Otherwise, both has to be there. That is x.email equals model.email. Here I'm not using case insensitive because I would expect that if people put emails, they should be case sensitive. Now the same logic that I would want to use for the phone, these conditions you can correct it on your own depending on your requirement. So I'm going to put here x.phone. The same goes here, phone. All right, are we happy with this? Okay, so now what we're going to do is, it looks good. So first, no, I'm missing one. Okay, so I'm using the first or default again. So now again, if the user exists with the same name, with the same email, with the same phone, we consider that the user is the same, and we are just going to reuse that user. Again, there is no in-depth security because someone can take your name, email, and go into it. We're not really trying to look into those because we're expecting that the authorization logic that you will be using on the tool will already be taking care of those. So maybe an additional password that we have should help, okay, but let's not deal with that. So if user is not equals null, or let's say if it is equals null instead, because we're going to want to create a new object for this one to register. So let's go fast, new student. All right, let's assign name equal to model dot username, and then email equal to model dot email, and then the phone number will be model dot phone. The entry date, which is the registration date. I would always prefer to save everything in a UTC format so that it becomes standard throughout. Now, and then access level, this is going to be a normal user, so I'll just give them an access level of 100. Okay, now a user is added. Context.students.add a user. and I will save it to make sure that it does not collide with any of the codes that I will be writing in next steps. Alright, so now we already make sure that the user object is filled, whether it is filled from the existing user, that is from the database, or filled from the new user that we just added, with all the ID parameters, with everything already updated into this one. Now the next thing that we have to do is we have to also check if the same user has already registered for the same test. Why? Because there is a possibility that someone is using the test and all of a sudden by mistake he clicks on the X mark on the right top and the browser closes. Would you want the user to start from the beginning, or would you want the user to rather resume, right? So we would allow the user to resume his test instead of redoing everything. So let's check registration, context dot registrations dot where x is x dot student ID equal to, now we already have user ID, okay, and the test ID equals the model dot the test ID, and the x dot the token has not expired. If the expire time is greater than UTC time, so this will tell us if there is already an existing one. If registration is not equals null, right? If it does not equal to, then I wanted to reuse this data somewhere maybe, so I'm just going to save this information, the token, right, as registration.token. I'm already retrieving the data, and this dot session of expire equals registration dot token expire. Well, I'm just putting this information which I think may be useful for use later on. I don't really see the need for putting this one at this point, but let's do it. Okay, so else what we will do, we know that the registration already exists. Oh no, it does not exist, so we need to register a new user. To do that, again, we have to verify if the test is actually a valid test. Test.where x dot is active and x dot ID equal to model dot test ID dot first or default. Now if test is not equals null, right? So if this is a valid test that the user is requesting, then since he has not registered, we can register him. Registration, let's call it new registration equal to new registration, registered date equal to that time that etc now. The test ID is model.test ID. The token is going to be GUID.new GUID. Token expire time, let's give it you know, any test has got a duration, right? So you're going to have to add the current time plus the UTC time, that is the time when it will expire. So at minutes from the current time with the test duration in minutes. Sounds smart, or sounds about right? Okay. So now, after all this, we just have to add the user into registration.add new registration, and the context.registrations.add new registration. Okay, and save changes. Now you might wonder, why do we need to have to add this into registrations and do like this? Well, it's really not necessary at times, but sometimes entity framework is really unreliable in certain aspects, and it kind of acts weird on some scenarios. Sometimes it will throw out some validation error, or a foreign key validation, because this registration and test are related to each other with the foreign key references. So it is safest to do it this way so that the mapping is not missed by Entity Framework when you add them. The actual code that adds them to Entity Framework is this one, but this is to ensure that the mapping is maintained. So once it gets saved, everything fine, we will just store the information again in session just in case we might want to use it from somewhere else. But know that the variable name will be new registration and new token. So now the next thing is, once the user is registered, all we have to do is take him to the next page, which will be the actual test page. So what we will call it, we will call it the evaluation page. So let's say public action result evaluation page, and let's say and if you also listen or remember the discussion that we had while we were talking about the design, we had this token explicitly because we can actually pass just the registration ID in plain text, right? Student ID, registration ID, test ID, all those things. But because we wanted to hide them, we're going to use this token ID as a means to communicate between different pages. So the token will be passed on here as token, and whenever you go to the page, if you look at this page, you get the token and you are in the first question. Now if you hit next, where does it go? It actually takes you to the second question, but it's still using the second page. So basically we wanted to reuse this page over and over and over again without needing to create a different page altogether. So we are expecting that a user will pass in these two information, not necessarily a question number, but definitely this one all the time. So that's the plan here, and that's the reason why we're going to have to put the GUID token as required and an integer, which is a nullable integer of the question number. May or may not pass the question number. If token equals null, so we will pass them back saying that you have an invalid token, please re-register and try again. Again, we're showing back to the login screen. Now otherwise we're good to go ahead. So let's create a new database context again, some dev entities. Let's verify. So I'll just put some notes here, verify that the user is currently registered. Let's say, and is allowed to check the question, let's say, right? So this is what we're going to do. Var the registration equal to context dot registrations dot where x dot. Do I have an active? No, I don't. So now I have a token in hand, so I have to check token that equals the token that is passed by the user. So the first thing that I check is if there is any token as such. If the registration dot token now let's check if it is already passed the. All right, what do we want it to do? We want it to give them some message, something very reasonable message to them. Okay, see, there's a point that anybody can argue on. We can actually put the condition here as well, and x.token expired time is greater, must be greater than date time.utc. Now the difference between putting this and this, let me explain, is when you put this condition in the select query, if the registration already expires, or if the registration does not exist, you have no way to know what is actually the problem, right? It will just simply return null. So that's the reason why I do not want to put this exception or this condition here. Instead, I wanted to check here explicitly so that I can give some meaningful message to the user. The exam duration has expired at then I can give them something like registration the token expire time .toString. Now that makes a lot of sense, right? Now that the user is really being told that the registration duration has expired, which means that the exam was valid, but the time has already expired. Okay, now next. I'm gonna have to also check if the question number dot get value or default is less than 0 or 1, because you know that on the first page they may or may not pass the question number, so I'll default every single invalid question number to 1. Now we have to make sure that if registration, because I'm sure we're gonna get null issues here if we get this, if registration equals null, then we can pass a similar message that says this token is invalid. So now I think this explains why we're doing this. We take it, we check if the token itself is valid. No, take them back. All right, so now the next thing is variable test question ID is equal to context test. Now what we're going to do is we're going to retrieve the question, right? So what we'll do is I'll just copy one of the questions that I have here, because this wanted to save a little bit of time for each of us. So what do? We have where test.registration.test and the question number equals the question number. So you want to select the first or the default. That's what we wanted to do. All right, so now if the test question ID is greater than 0, say variable model equal to the context dot test x question dot where x dot id equals the test question ID. It's wrong. Okay, select x such that. Let's do it this way. All right, so now here comes an interesting topic. All right, because we're working on a MVC and we have a page here, we do not want to just simply pass the entity model that we just retrieved from the database, because it's way too much information. So what we will do is we will just go ahead and create one model that we wanted to pass on to the question page, that we will call it as a question model. Class question model. All right, I'll just copy paste the code that I have here. You can pause the video if you have questions on the model, because I just wanted to save some time here so that we can spend more time in explaining the questions. So that's the model design. Now what we can do is we can create a new object like this. All right, I'll leave the model here a little bit and explain. So we're retrieving the question from the test question. All right, creating a new question model. Question type, question number, question the points, the test ID, the test name, and the options. So again, this entity framework has joined the relation table, which is the choices, by the foreign key. And we're retrieving all the choices in the model with the ID and just the text, nothing more. All we have to do now is we have to return the view with the model. Are we putting it in the right place? Yes, we are putting in the right place. So let's see. Uh-oh, I have to put it here. In case if they are coming up with, let's say we wanted to return the error page instead of returning every time to every place. We have a standard shared error message. So if for whatever reason the question ID was not found, all right, we will take them to an error page. Okay, so let's test out. All right, before that we need to add the page. I'm sorry, I have already forgotten this. that we've not edited. So let's add the question. All right, evaluation page we call it. Then add. All right, so here let's just put it this way so that we don't have to do anything extra right now. And then let's test this. Click on register and start. I definitely do get issues because I think, alright, so I think I made a mistake here somewhere in the code, because in the register is trying to return register page. So register should return, oh yes, here's the problem. So register should return the page, which is the evaluation page, and passing the GUID as a new object, which will be at token equals session dot token, which is good enough. And I don't necessarily have to pass the question number. Build it, go back to the page, refresh. Alright, that looks good. So we have the page up and running. Everything looks okay. Just a recap of what we've learned in this video. We learned how to check if the user exists. If it is, we continue, otherwise we add a new user. Then we check if the user's registration already exists or has expired. Depending on that, we take the decision, and then we take them to the next page, which is the evaluation page. Now this is the page that we will work on in our next video. So thank you for watching, and I hope to see you there. Bye bye.